Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes who have made their homes along the Columbia River. So please join us in acknowledging the land we're all on throughout Portland and beyond. To learn more about Portland's native, diverse, and vibrant community, please read Leading with Tradition, a document created by the Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable. And there will be a link to that in the chat. All right. I would like to just check the chat real quick and make sure everybody can hear us. Oh, sorry, some people weren't able to hear at the beginning. I'm terribly sorry about that. Okay, now that everyone can hear, I would like to introduce our sponsor today. OHSU is sponsoring this event. We really appreciate it. To speak on behalf of OHSU is Nicole Garrison. So Nicole, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nicole Garrison. I'm a program administrator for OHSU Innovates. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. I am a white woman with glasses and long brown hair, and I'm wearing a black dress with a, I believe this is teal cardigan. It is such a pleasure to be here on behalf of OHSU. I've known Dr. Jackie Wirz for many years. She's a phenomenal human being. I can guarantee that we're going to have a great presentation from her today, and we're all in for a treat. We at OHSU are so very proud to be sponsoring this OBI Lunch and Learn addressing equity. As Oregon's only public academic and research health center, OHSU cares deeply about bringing health and hope to all people. OHSU's vision, as outlined in our current strategic plan, is to make Oregon a national leader in health and science innovation for the purpose of improving the lives of Oregonians and those beyond. One of our main goals for achieving this is by building a diverse, equitable environment where all can thrive and excel. OHSU has rolled out a number of initiatives to make OHSU a truly anti-racist and multicultural institution. And I recommend everyone takes a look at the OHSU website, particularly the website for OHSU Center for Diversity and Inclusion, to read about the many DEI programs the organization has and will be rolling out. Now, as mentioned earlier, I am part of OHSU Innovates, a collaborative network that supports innovation and entrepreneurship at OHSU and beyond. We evaluate, protect, manage, and promote OHSU intellectual property to help bring innovation to the public. We develop and support industry and academic collaborative partnerships and new startup company formation. We host educational opportunities on the topics of IP, commercialization, and entrepreneurship. And we assist with grant funding to support early stage technology development. Now, we at OHSU Innovates, we are also very committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the innovation process. It's only been in about the last 5 years the US Patent and Trademark Office has even taken a look at the demographics of inventors in the United States. And what they found probably will not surprise anybody who's attending today. There is significant underrepresentation of women and people from ethnic and racial minorities in the innovation process. And not only is the underrepresentation in comparison to the US population demographics, but even in compared to the gender, racial, and ethnic demographic makeup of the top patent producing fields, which are science and engineering. So this is obviously a major problem, and OHSU Innovate sees this as a major problem because in order for innovation to serve the entire community and address the needs of all people, everyone needs adequate representation in the innovation process and in the innovation ecosystem. So OHSU Innovates, thanks to racial equity and inclusion funding from the OHSU Center for Diversity and Inclusion and the OHSU Office of Educational Improvement and Innovation, is in the process of developing a program to support and encourage BIPOC and women innovators at the university. We have been working hard planning this program and look forward to launching it in the next few months. I encourage everyone participating today to sign up for the OHSU Innovates newsletter and stay up to date about this program. Let's learn the other things that we've been working on over at OHSU in the innovation sphere. And I want to thank OBI once again for including us today. And I'm so excited to hear about this presentation on equity today.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate that. So I have the very wonderful pleasure of introducing our presenter today, Jackie Wirz. I'm going to read her bio real quick. Jackie Wirz, PhD, is the executive director of Donate Life Northwest. It's a longstanding nonprofit dedicated to saving lives through organ, eye, and tissue donation. Jackie takes great joy in connecting people, data, and ideas to create strategic solutions that develop community. From running a successful nonprofit during COVID to designing and funding an institution-wide Title IX support program, even gathering 15,000 people to March for Science, her dynamic and imaginative approach makes a difference for individuals, organizations, and communities. As a bipolar minority woman in science, Jackie believes that the most important work we can do is to support underrepresented minorities and underserved populations as we work toward a just landscape. She's excited to partner with the OBI on actionable, everyday DEI work. I'm going to stop my share screen here. And Jackie,
All right.
you have the floor.
So thank you for that very kind introduction from both of you. Clearly, you don't know how many ways that I have completely screwed things up, fallen off stages, put my foot in my mouth, but that is all part of the journey that brings me here today. So just as Nicole mentioned, she gave a verbal description of what she looks like. So I'm going to do the same. I am a distressingly average looking middle-aged Asian lady that is struggling to fit into her professional clothing because it's been in the closet for 2 years. But with that in mind, I am wearing a lovely blue top and a black skirt, and I am wearing heels. So if you hear a sudden thud, that's just me falling over. So today I'm here to talk about everyday steps in equity. And now this is one of these conversations that it feels like we've been having this for years. The importance of equity and racial understanding really came to the forefront in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd. And since then, there has been this continual sense of we need to do better. We must do better. But at the same time, it's been difficult for many people to find a foothold into that conversation and to find a meaningful way to connect into our very own diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. So today's presentation is going to be focused on small everyday steps that we can take that will cumulatively make an impact. The exercises that we're going to be doing today are long-standing ones that have been practiced within the DEI community for quite some time. So there's nothing groundbreaking or earth-shattering in the exercise, but their foundational utility is what we're focusing on as being a real easy entry point for people to start this journey. Now, why is this important? It's always important to understand why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. From a fiscal standpoint, we know that businesses that invest in an equitable workplace have a higher return on investment. We also know that diversifying your downstream components that bring in business to your business can increase your profits by up to 138%. And most importantly, when you have an equitable and inclusive workplace environment, not only can you recruit the best talent, you can also retain the best talent. And most recent studies have shown that there's a 16% turnover for individuals in the tech sector at any given time. But if you're working with an individual of color, that number jumps up to almost 40% turnover on a year-to-year basis for those positions. Now, this is distressing. People of color have incredible perspectives. The diverse experiences of each and every one of our lived lives are bringing that experience to the conversation. And as we all know, in science, it's about solving problems. And solving problems with the same mindset time after time after time again is not going to solve the problem in a way that is going to be innovative, exciting, groundbreaking, and changing. To do so, we need to have as many minds, perspectives, and cultures in the room at the same time. So the fundamental reason why you should care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it creates excellence in all that we do, individually, in a workplace, and as a society. So another reason, and this is something that I hear a lot, is like, oh, Portland and Oregon, we're so terribly white. Well, there are a lot of white people in Portland, Oregon, but did you know that 47% of the population between the ages of 18 and 30 are identified as people of color? 47%. That is your future workforce, not just soon, really soon. These people are entering the workforce. They're going to be joining your companies. They are going to be the talent that is going to grow your portfolio. And if we cannot connect to that 47% of talent in the state of Oregon, we're missing out on a huge opportunity. So the case for diversity, equity, inclusion is one that I could go on and on about, but I am instead going to try and focus on getting this ball rolling with a conversation and an exercise. Now, we are all here eating delicious catered food, and if you're online at home, you're eating delicious homemade food, or if you're me, on any other day, eating a delicious Lunchable, you are experiencing food. Now, food is one of the most amazing things in our universe, as far as I am concerned. What I would like you to do is to think a little bit about what your comfort food is. Now, just close your eyes for a second, and I want you to think about what is that food, that dish, or that drink that gives you that sense of everything's going to be okay. This is something that I enjoy eating. It is something that reminds me of my mother, or it's that time that I was in France for the very first time and I ordered escargot and I had no idea it was snails. It is the feeling that comes with that food. Now, food is intrinsically linked to culture. It's linked to our past experiences. It's linked to how we perceive ourselves. It's linked to the overarching family and friends that we've experienced that food with. So what I would like you to do now is to pair up in small groups and tell each other a little bit about your comfort food, why it's meaningful to you. And we're going to do that for 5 minutes and then come back and have a little conversation and debrief about what this conversation kind of sparked for you. All right.
And for those of you in person on Zoom, I set up some breakout rooms. So go ahead and join your rooms.
Yeah. So this is comfort food.
Well, I would say that there isn't necessarily a comfort food that, any of us really relied on. I think it's a matter of, I postulate that maybe if you were from an immigrant family, you probably have a more ethnic tie comfort food. But if you've been here for a while, or if you grew up in the Midwest or whatever, you may not. If you say, well, I don't eat any food that I grew up with because I grew up in the Midwest and I'm not going to eat that kind of food anymore. So in some respects, I think many people don't necessarily have comfort food.
Yeah.
At least not one that you tie to a particular ethnic or country of origin. But,
yeah.
I think it's hard to say what that really would be. I think for me, I find, obviously I grew up eating rice instead of potatoes, but I'm pretty American. Been here for 4 generations now. But the other side is I always enjoy Hawaiian food when I can get it. Can't find it very often. So I think it's a matter of what you've been exposed to and then what you latched onto.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something about food, is that it is something that you can enjoy with sometimes very limited experiences. So I did hear people that had travel food experiences that resulted in their comfort food. For others, it's the thing that they grew up with, the food that their mom made, even if their mom made substandard food, which is my mom. But the thing about the idea about comfort food is that even if we don't think it has culture, for example, Minnesota, hot dish, tuna noodle casserole is my comfort food. It is objectively terrible. There is nothing that is nutritionally valuable. There is no taste value in that food whatsoever, but it is my comfort food. And it is a culture. It is a culture of the Midwest. It is a food that is very cheap. It's a food that is shelf stable. It is a food that is preparable in the middle of a blizzard. And even though we may not think of it as being an ethnic portion of culture, it really is, because it was formed by the community that I grew up in the Midwest. So when we think about food, there are many, many different aspects to it. And that is the gateway conversation that I wanted you to have. Because next I want to talk a little bit about the iceberg of culture. Now, again, this is a concept that's been around for a very long time, originating way back in the 1970s with Peace Corps, when the Peace Corps was trying to develop trainings for their staff as they were embarking on these year-plus expeditions in countries all across the world. In order to provide effective training, they of course wanted to say, oh, if you're going to be heading into South America, we want to give you the most topical information about South America, but that didn't scale. They weren't able to find enough people to provide that culturally specific training. So they invented the iceberg. Now, what do we know about icebergs aside from the fact that Leo and Kate totally couldn't fit on that piece of it? Most of it's below the surface. For an iceberg, roughly 10% of the iceberg is above the surface, but that 10% is supported by the 90% that is below the surface. So when we're thinking about culture, oftentimes we start by thinking what's above the surface. So what are some above the surface kind of aspects of culture that we can see? Go for it.
Holidays,
Holidays, yep.
language,
Language,
dress.
Attire.
yes, thank you, online.
I'd say currency.
Currency,
Food.
food is definitely up there. Religion. Now that's an interesting one, because as we start looking at what is below that 10%, what's one thing about religion that it instills in us?
Values.
Values. What are some other things that fall into the unseen?
Upbringing history.
Sorry?
I said upbringing history. So people come from all kind of background, refugees, immigrant, homeless, people experiences, life experiences, I guess.
The totality of life experience?
Someone online said social norms.
Yes. Now this is a huge one that is both visible and invisible. So for example, making eye contact. Direct, sustained eye contact tends to be a very white dominant culture trait. We view the eye contact as being authentic and bold and strong, and that we are intentionally making this communication connection. Whereas in Native American cultures, it is considered disrespectful to be looking people directly in the eye. It is something that they generally avoid, and they tend to look down as a sign of respect. So these social norms are things that we may not be aware of, and we're wondering, well, why isn't this person making eye contact with me? Am I doing something wrong, or do they just not like me? This person must not be good at communication. Therefore, this person must not be good at what they're doing. So there's a lot of social norms that we take for granted as being part of a white dominant culture. Anything else that falls in the 90%?
Time, a sense of time.
How we value and understand time. Now, this goes into we're going to talk about metaphysics. How we perceive time and the value of immediacy is one thing that falls generally on the white culture, dominant culture. We view things as happening immediately, the faster the better. Whereas in a multitude of other cultures, the process is more important. The time and journey taken and the quality of that journey taken is more important. So time is viewed differently, and the value of how time is taken is viewed differently. Yes.
Just a piece of social norms, but what professionalism looks like, what is professional dress, professional speech, professional presentation.
Absolutely. So professionalism is a very loaded word. Actually, in the second portion of today's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about loaded words in our workplace culture. And professionalism is one of them because it is embedded in an ideal of professionalism being a successful white male. They're going to look a certain way, they're going to act a certain way, and to not fall directly into that expected paradigm is to be slightly less professional. So that's definitely one of those that falls into both the spectrum of above the 10% line and below.
Just like culture, I mean, you know, customs and social behavior.
Customs.
Jackie, what about disability?
Disability is a fabulous example because again, disability falls into disability. You'll also find that I can't spell with a damn. So disability is one of those things that falls in both above and below. So for many, there are visible signs of disability, and this is sometimes coming with a whole bunch of baggage because people have assumptions about what it means to be in a wheelchair or to use a cane. But there's so much about disability that might not be visible. So for example, I am bipolar. I take pills every day to make sure that I am as a high functioning professional as possible. And I am very proud of the fact that I have been able to manage my mental diagnosis. But this is an invisible thing that has shaped who I am and how I work. And it is not something that if you looked at my picture online that you'd be like, oh, she be cray. No. When you look at me online, you don't see that, but yet it still shapes who I am. So this is an example of it can be both visible and invisible. Anything else?
Interpersonal space.
Space. So the next time you do this workshop, we're just going to get an actual physicist in here to talk about these very, very deep issues about time and space. How we view space, how we feel entitled to space, what personal space is, how much we have, how much is mine, and how we can actually interface with other people's space. All of this is built into our culture. So we are used to, for example, in white America, more traditional housing where there is a mother, a father, a child in a house. Whereas multi-generational housing is actually the norm in so many countries. Where my best friend comes from in Indonesia, a multi-generational house is the dream scenario. People are looking to create that sense of family and have the privilege to have that multi-generational experience. So a sense of space is definitely one of those things that is part of that cultural conversation. So the iceberg is multitude. Now, the great thing about the iceberg exercise is that you can continue to discuss a whole variety of things that fall above and below the waterline. And what this means is that this creates so many different facets of DEI that you can explore in your everyday practice. So that gets me to the everyday practice. Now, I'm a huge fan of 3. We all know from psychology that short-term memory can handle 5 plus or minus 2 things at any given time. Because my short-term memory likes to underachieve, I'm going to go for 3. All right. So the 3 things that we're talking about today are individual, and then workplace, and then society and community. So we're kind of building a base of individual actions that we can take to create equity every day. Then we're going to scaffold that into how we can do this in the workplace. And then lastly, wrap up with a couple of examples about how we can do this in our communities to benefit our larger society. Now, the way that this works requires 3 things: learning, reflecting, and acting. Now, this is not Nobel Prize level thought here. This is very simple. 3 simple steps: learn, reflect, act. But when we think about where we fail when it comes to DEI work, is that we fail to combine these 3 things together. So sometimes we're real quick to act. we are going to donate to Black Lives Matter. We're going to give a whole bunch of money. We're going to go to the protest. But did we actually learn anything in particular about the lived experience of Black Portlanders? Did we reflect on how their lived experiences is different from mine and how I am privileged in being able to attend a protest? Sometimes we learn, and this is where a lot of people spend a lot of their time in their DEI work, is they are focused on the learning. They're signing up for that one-day workshop. They're going to learn so much, and they come away with a binder. They've got a book, they've got a plan, they've got all of these things. But unless they're reflecting on how it ties to yourself individually, that is just learning facts that will evaporate into the air unless you tether them to your own lived experience. And there's people that sometimes spend all of their time reflecting, and then oftentimes there's a learning and then acting without the internal reflection. So what do you think happens when we are learning and skipping to action and missing the reflection? What happens then? It becomes a recursive loop. Well, what is another thing, side effect of this? We lack authenticity. If we skip any one of these steps, authenticity. If we skip the reflection, if we skip the acting, because we're just learning. So as an organization, if we say it's Black History Month, we put together all of these articles for you to read, and we're going to watch the 13th. Great. But if you don't reflect and act on it, that becomes performative allyship, and that lacks authenticity. The way to generate authenticity, to create meaningful change for yourself, your workplace, and your community is to make sure that all 3 steps are being done. Now, having said that, this isn't going to take all day, every day. We all have lives to live. And in fact, the best way that we can integrate DEI into our lives is to live our lives with a little bit of intentionality. So when it comes to our DEI journey, there's the first thing that I'm going to tell you is something that might be surprising. And that is that we're going to set goals for our DEI journey. That's not surprising. Everyone always says set goals that help you manifest things and help you hold yourself accountable. But the first thing I'm going to say is whatever goal you have in mind, cut it in half. And then cut it in half again. So rather than saying, I'm going to go forth, I'm going to read How to Be Anti-Racist, and I am going to create a book club about that and disseminate that and make that part of my workplace culture. The big ass goal. It's a great goal. It's a lovely goal. I bet for a week or 2, you are gung-ho on that goal. But this is where things fall off the rails. We need to be more realistic in our capacity and our capabilities. And when we are honest with what we are capable of doing and absorbing and creating realistic goals, then we can make realistic progress. The worst thing you can do in DEI is to set an unattainable goal and fail to meet it, and then subsequently be turned off by the activities. So when you're setting your DEI goal for your journey, set it small. Now, this is about creating equity every day. I would say, let's go with 30 minutes once a week. 30 minutes once a week, you can read something for 15 minutes, reflect for 10, and then set an intentionality or an act for 5. So for example, the food exercise. Real quick and easy. You just talk to a bunch of other people about their comfort foods. So maybe during your next lunch break, rather than going to hit Mac Hall Cafe at OHSU and have the exact same mac and cheese that has been there since the dawn of time, maybe you're going to try Thai Yummy, the cart that is across the street and is delicious. And while you're eating your Thai food, maybe that's an opportunity for you to do a little bit of research about why is it that they use rice-based noodles? And why is it that they have developed these particular set of vegetables that go into their curries? And why is it that Thai curries in the United States are so different than Thai curries in Thailand? And spend just a couple of minutes learning and thinking about that. And then spend that 10 minutes of reflection about how does this change your perception of Thai food or Thai culture or anything to do with that particular lunch experience. How are you going to learn or grow from it? And then set an action. Now, the action doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be, I am going to go forth, I'm going to go to Thailand, and I am going to learn all of the things. No, the action can be, I'm going to be intentional and maybe trying this one ingredient the next time I cook. During my little 15 minutes of research, I discovered a really cool pepper. It sounds like it could cause gastrointestinal distress in my friends, so I'm going to add that to the next time I eat to my food to spice up the dinner party, right? So a small act like that is how you're going to actionalize your DEI journey. Another way is to set an intent to say, okay, I have tasted this food and I have thought deeply about this food. For the next of my week, for the remainder of the days of this week, when I have lunch, I am going to take just a moment to think, where did this food come from? And what does it mean that this is an excellent taco? Or that this is a samosa worth dying for? And just give yourself time to think about why that is and why this food is delicious and important to people. So that intentionality is a great way to act as a first baby step, right? So learn, reflect, act, do all three. So now that we've talked about those three key things put together, I want to give you a short list of potential activities that you can do as an individual to advance your DEI journey. Now, the first of which is what I like to call the new news perspective. So I don't know about you, but I always go to the same websites for my news. I shouldn't tell you what they are, but I go to the same websites. But what I do is that once a month, I go to a different website. I go to New York Times most of the time, but every so often I will go to Fox News. If you are a Washington Post kind of person, maybe it's time to try out once a month going to Pamplin Media Group and look at one of the small local newspaper that covers Clackamas County. Get that perspective change. It's still the news. They're going to be covering the same topics that you've already been reading about, but just that shift in perspective is going to be a great practice for you to start developing a larger sense and understanding about how information and knowledge, which is the true value of so much of what we do, can be perceived differently in different cultures and communities. So the new news perspective. The next is cultural exploration through media. So we talked about food. There is so much out there for music, for theater, for pretty much everything. And the great thing is that we live in an era where you can sample from so many phenomenal artists. You can watch Korean horror films at the same time that you're eating samosas from Swap. So exploring different cultures is something that we can integrate into our leisure time just as much as we can in this deliberate sense of practice. Now, the next one is intensely uncomfortable. So I was going to do this as an exercise, but then I realized I want you to like me. So we're not going to do this as an exercise. And that is the 5 whys. Now, this is hard. So what you do is you think about an assumption or a statement that you have made. Like, I assume that every single person in this room is a higher up executive in a biotech company. And then Nicole's going to ask me why. Well, it's because this is the OBI listserv, and then she's going to ask me why. Well, this is because biotech tends to be attracting people that are highly educated and they tend to be white. Why is that? Well, that's because people that are more facile with the higher education system come from families that have already been through the higher education system. And why is that? And that is because systemic racism. So asking the 5 whys is a really interesting way to try and get to the roots of an assumption or a problem that you may have. It is meant to be uncomfortable. You are meant at some point to not be able to answer the question because you're going to be like, why? I don't know why I'm making that assumption. Or, oh, wow, that was really rooted in a bad decision. So asking yourself the 5 whys is something that is going to take a little bit of an emotional toll, but it is worth doing. All right, the next is ask yourself daily, is this equitable? Is this inclusive? So on my computer, on my screen monitor, I have a sticky note, and there's one that says, is it equitable? The other one says, is it inclusive? And every day it starts off on the left of my screen. And by the end of the day, I just make sure that it's on the right of my screen. Because when I have done something, I have worked on a policy for my organization, I ask myself, is this equitable? And I put the sticky on the other side because I have done that question for the day. Now, that's not to say that I don't ask that question throughout the day, but it just reminds me to make it a daily practice. So on my monitor, sticky notes, is this inclusive? The same question, I make sure that I ask it once a day, at least as a bare minimum. The next is DEI specific learning. Hello, Secure Shredding.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. The next tip is to shred everything. No, I'm just kidding. The next is DEI specific learning, but remember to set realistic and reasonable goals for it. So sign yourself up for Portland Means Progress. I'm sorry. Oh, no worries. Sign yourself up for a Portland Means Progress executive DEI workshop series. These are free. They are very, very well done. Sign yourself up for that. And then make sure that you, in addition to learning, make time for reflection and action. So that's a great thing to do. The DEI specific learning, there's so many of them that are out there that I'm not going to list them all, but just know that there are a lot of resources available. But again, be mindful of your time. The next is to set a daily intention to broaden your understanding and listen with empathy and openness. And that's a very simple thing to do. On occasion, rather than maybe just responding, sit and listen and be silent and absorb how that changes the interaction you're having. So those are some individual daily practices. Now, I am running out of time, so we're going to move to organizational, and I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of organizational work that we can do. And then I will close out with how we can work within our community and our larger society. Because I am running out of time, I'm not going to be able to do the exercise that I had wanted to, but I'll discuss it so you guys can do it amongst yourselves. And then if you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me. And then there is going to be a Google Doc that has resources, and I would love for you to contribute to that doc as well. So on an organizational level, organizational growth in the DEI journey is a marathon, just like it is for an individual. And as an organization, because we have a clear hierarchy of leaders, it's really easy to say, oh, the leader's going to make the equity statement. And in fact, you could throw a rock in 2020 and hit an equity statement that was brand new, shiny, that was produced because of George Floyd's murder. So many companies did that. My company did that. But in fact, this is where we went off the rails because we didn't build the authenticity into that statement because we had no foundation for that statement. We knew that it was wrong, but we did not have the background inside our organization to make that statement in a way that was truly authentic. So how do you build that authenticity within your organization? It's a slow process, but it begins with, first of all, asking yourself honestly, where are we as an organization? Are we pro forma doing things because it's expected of us as a biotech company in the 21st century? Or are we doing this out of a genuine sense of care for our own workplace and employees and the culture of our workplace? So you definitely want to be starting off with just considering, do your internal landscape analysis, and then get board engagement, staff engagement. Use those data as inputs to create a POC lens that you're going to use to develop the subsequent activities. And again, slow and steady wins the race. Don't run out and say you're going to do this 37 session program and it's going to be all sunshine and kittens. There's a lot of work. Now, as executives in a company, it is imperative that you are invested visibly in this work. And you must display a sense of vulnerability in that you are open to learning and growing from the work. If this does not happen, you do not have the authenticity, it will be viewed as a top-down experience, and it won't develop that really true groundswell of culture change that creates a fabulous workplace environment. So once you've kind of developed a sense of everybody being on the same page, then create tools, then create policies, Then start monitoring your impact. And once you have demonstrated impact because you created informed change, then you can create your equity statement. Now, there are a bevy of consultants out there that can help you with this, because the hardest thing for us to do is to internally do this work ourselves, because we're entrenched in our own workplace culture. So I would highly encourage you to invest in DEI with qualified professionals. Now, I said qualified professionals earlier, and Hazel laughed, because there are a lot of unqualified professionals out there, and that is true. But this is where you can really source this through people that have done this before you. And there are lots of reputable, wonderful consultants in the Portland area. So if you need any referrals, I'm happy to give them to you. Marcus Carter is the coolest person I know, and Farrell Building is the most awesome HR consultant you will ever meet. All right. So the organizational authenticity takes longer to grow and requires buy-in. Now, a couple of key things. You need to center BIPOC voices, but you do not exploit BIPOC voices. This can be really hard, especially if you have a small org. If you have a small org that has one person of color, don't everybody look at that person and be like, well, what do you think? Tell us all the things. That is not centering a BIPOC voice. That is really threatening a BIPOC voice. So you need to make sure that the conversation is emotionally equitable, that people are equally invested emotionally, and it is emotional work. True DEI work is going to be difficult. So you want to make sure that you have emotional investment from everybody at the table in order to achieve that impact, and take the emotional labor off the individual of color and collectively take it on as a group. Because DEI work is emotional labor, you also want to make sure that you give time for it. Don't push this too quickly. You will just train wreck your results. Make sure that you give space for recovery. Now, I know you're just like, well, that's great, but we already took time to do this training and they need to get this assay done. We need to get shit done. That is true. But as with anything in our lives, if we prioritize it, we can make it work. So give them the DEI space, give them the time to rest and recover and rejuvenate from those conversations. And if you build it in, both in time and budget, that is a true institutional commitment to DEI. All right, so the activity I was gonna do was about meeting culture. So most of our lives get sucked away into meetings, and most of our life force is diminished by every single meeting. I play D&D, I have stats bars, I go into meetings, they all drop to zero, okay? So meeting is a perfect example of white dominant culture. The loudest voice in the room, a single point of authority, not necessarily gaining input, and having a time-bound, decision-based conversation where numbers are valued more than experience. So what I was going to do is an exercise about how we can flip meeting culture. How can we make meetings more inclusive? How can we make them something that is equitable? So to get to the punchline, so to speak, there are lots of things that we can do. First of all, we can examine who's in the meeting. They need to be there. If you're not going to give them a voice, don't get them to the meeting. That's wasting their time. That's wasting your time. Make sure that every person has a role that they're playing and a perspective that they're bringing, and give them the space and grace to do so. Next, clear meeting agendas. I know they exist. So clear meeting agendas, what's going to happen? Make sure that they're released ahead of time. These are small things, but they make a huge difference. Next, make sure that the process is clear. This meeting is to make a decision, and it's a consultative meeting. So it's not a vote. I'm just consulting for opinions, which will be consolidated into the decision. Or this meeting is going to be a very, very input heavy meeting where every voice has a say in how we're going to develop this particular product. So making sure that the process is clear to those who are participating goes a long way. Next, you want to make sure that there are multiple modes of input. So we are used to the loudest voice in the room. I have a loud voice. I happen to enjoy that. But I realize that I'm squashing other people's voices. So we need to make sure that we're building in space for silence, for people to provide written commentary, for people to provide asynchronous feedback. So making sure that all of this is available will help create an inclusive meeting culture. Some loaded words in our workplace culture are perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, quantity over quality, only one right way, either or thinking, power thinking. Oftentimes we're always thinking in power over rather than power with or power to the people that we're working with. So these are all lots of concepts that I want to throw out there. And the action items for a company that you can take every day is to ask those questions. Is this inclusive? Is this equitable? Make that a practice for yourself, but make it a practice for your employees. Listen to the BIPOC voices about what they need for support and encouragement. And from there, there is a whole bevy of well-documented workplace solutions for DEI. And I won't go into a lot of that here due to time constraints, but just know that there are a huge number of resources out there for workplaces. And I want to close by talking about community. Now, when it comes to impacting our community, oftentimes it's easy to think I am just one person, but one person can make a huge difference. The thing that we all have, in addition to our own culture and our own backgrounds and our own experiences, is we have time, talent, and if we're lucky, treasure. To invest in your communities is to invest these three things. You can invest your time in volunteering at the food bank. You can invest treasure by donating to any fund out there right now, supporting great causes. And you can invest your talent by running for office, by volunteering with a nonprofit, by doing any kind of community service. But again, the most important thing is understanding realistic goals for how you're going to take your DEI practice and journey into the next level. Okay, so I did a lot of talking, I apologize, but to give a quick summary, on the individual level, we're setting realistic goals for a practice that is going to be manageable. My first suggestion is 30 minutes once a week. And if you put it on your calendar and make it part of that practice, it's like sit-ups, you're gonna develop that six-pack app, right? Then next, for the workplace, think about the culture and make sure that you're building that workplace culture first before you build the tools and policies and create that racial equity statement. Make sure that your foundation is strong. And then for society, invest your time, talent, and treasure. Don't just go forth without thinking cognitively about what you are engaging in and the impact you want to make. Any DEI action is undermined if we are not doing all three of these things: learning, reflecting, and acting. Do not uncouple these things. Even if the action is just, I'm going to think more intentionally about this, that is an action. I strongly encourage you to write this down. So I have a DEI notebook at my desk for my 30 minutes once a week. I do my learning, my reflecting, I make an I statement on the reflecting statement. I feel that this impacted me in this way. And my action, I write down my intent and my action for the week. And that way I'm holding myself accountable. So I have run out of time. I want to thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. I love the awkward, is it now?
Good question.
Yeah.
On recovery time, we're investing in the learning phase. Nicole's running a big program, and I'd say we're in the learning phase.
Yeah.
And what is a reasonable recovery time? We're taking modules and we'll be working on it for I don't know, 3 months.
For this first module, about 4 months, we're
Yeah,
gonna be
about 4
working on it.
months.
And it's about a half hour every 2 weeks that we're doing it as a work group.
Mhm.
And there's gonna be some individual work as well.
So what's a reasonable recovery time after the group goes through those modules?
Yeah, so I would say that you want to space it out with each module. And so you want to have a module and then just maybe for an hour afterwards, mark it no meeting time. One of the most powerful things that we can do as executives and companies is give the gift of time and space. So make it a no meeting hour for the hour after the actual training. And people can choose to work or they can choose to take the recovery time that they need. In my experience with my employees, it varies a little bit, but we don't do DEI sessions longer than 90 minutes. And when we do, we have a flex program with my employees. So they get up to 1 hour of emotional recovery time from, we work with death as part of our job in 15-minute increments. So they can take 15, 30, 45, or an hour. And we went with the trust system. Like, you know, if you need this time, take it. There's a special marker in Teams that we put on our out of office so that people know. And people respect it. Honestly, 15 minutes is what most people need. They just need a couple of minutes to pull themselves together and just to think about what this means. And then they can do the rest of the processing later. But an hour of no meeting time afterwards, and then giving them permission to take a little bit of time is really what you need.
And with modules, giving them some space between modules, I assume.
Yes. Yeah. DEI learning from a fire hose is not DEI learning. That is DEI performative, not good work.
That's authenticity.
Yeah, it totally lacks authenticity.
Thank you.
Other question?
I was just thinking that as you're talking about it, this very much seems like a marathon and not a sprint.
Mhm.
And, you know, when you get involved in things that often start out like a sprint, like you talked about, they fizzle out.
Mhm.
So any other tips that you can offer for keeping things to be, you know, like keep the pace of the marathon? Like sometimes you walk and then you jog and you walk, you know, like any other things that you think about to help to frame that would be helpful.
The wave. Storm, norm, reform. So you're going to have a period where you're storming ideas. You're going to try and create a new normal within your organization, and then you need to reflect on what's happening. And this corresponds to energy. So initially, the idea phase is like really exciting. Then the actual energy that goes into whatever you're implementing, whether that's a policy overhaul or a workplace culture overhaul. And then there's this drop off in energy. It's totally normal. It happens all the time. And you use that space for reflection. And you acknowledge the fact that there's going to be times of low energy in this effort. And as long as you acknowledge that and kind of plan for it up front, you're much more likely to keep on moving on. So build in times when it's not going to be the same level of effort and intensity, and you will create a much more effective tidal wave in the long run. That makes sense.
So you're saying do some, allow it to kind of sink in, then do it again. Don't just like do all of it. And then everybody gets excited, does stuff, and then it goes away forever.
Yes, exactly. And another thing to do is there are so many different things that you could do. Trying to change 6 things all at once is not going to work. So think really small and granular on the first thing that you want to do. So maybe the first thing that you want to do is going to be adding pronouns to email signatures. So you're going to storm the idea of how are we going to implement this? How are we going to push it out? Everyone does it. You're going to see how it feels afterwards. Small thing makes big difference, and it is manageable. So definitely go for small individual things. Whatever your goal is, so culture change, goal, break it down as granular as possible. And then each one of those little bullet items, break it down even more. And then when you can no longer get to any more level of granularity, each bullet point becomes one of these ways.
Yeah, and maybe make it part of your culture overall.
Yes. And, you know, if you set early on the cultural expectation that this is a marathon, and like if you've ever trained for a marathon, you know, you have recovery weeks. Like you just have to. It's impossible to sustain that amount of effort for forever. So build that in and build that expectation in. DEI work is all about clear communication. And sometimes that clear communication is hey, we're struggling to figure out the best way. We're giving this a try. It is better, like innovation cycles, to just keep on cycling and failing. Because failing is going to be okay. It's another thing that we're terrified of is failure. So white fragility, failure equals the end of the universe, right? So when you think about from a white supremacy culture standpoint and the idea of doing DEI work, like right off the bat, there's a whole bunch of like, and then you throw in there, it could fail. And everyone's like, nope, done, out, right? So failure is how we learn. And failure is authentic failure, where you tried and it didn't work. that's still building cachet in your workplace. That is saying, yeah, they're willing to try this. They're willing to try this conversation. And yeah, it sucked, but they tried. They listened to us. And so we're not going to be doing blah, 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 blah anymore. So build in a little bit of failure. And that's, again, why building in this time here that is lower energy is that if it was a failure, you have time to lick your wounds. And then you have time to grow back from that.
Sort of fighting a culture of no regrets, which is really bad. So a good book to read is Dan Pink's The Power of Regret,
Ah,
because in fact, the learning and looking back, and regret is actually your way of looking and say, how could I have done this differently? What I learned from this? How would I use it differently?
yes.
For some reason, particularly, well, Western culture picked up this no regrets thing. I think it goes historically back to, I don't know, some celebrity at some point that said, you know, no regrets, and people took it seriously. And in fact, by taking that, you ignore where you made a mistake. You don't reflect on that. So you go back to learning and then acting, repeating your mistakes or not have learned anything from that. So I think it's something you have to do.
That is so true. And the thing for me that stands out about that is the no reflection. It's the just go, 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 not reflect, no regrets. One of my favorite tattoos is when someone got no regrets tattooed on them and it's misspelled. That is the approach to take. Misspell it and then put it on yourself permanently. There is a link here. It's bit.ly/equity everyday, capital E, capital E, capital B. That'll take you to a Google Doc that has some resources in there. And it's purposely very short because you can go forth and find really extensive documents full of this stuff. But I also would encourage you to add stuff. So if you have this link, you have the ability to add items to this link. So if you found a resource that's really good, throw it in there. There are two classics. Again, I really, really like classic DEI exercises because they've been tried and true, and you can look at a lot of people's results from them. Two things that I really highly recommend. Harvard Implicit Bias Test. Even if you've done it before, do it again and be horrified. There are so many different new ones that have popped up over the last 15 years. Weight, gender, ethnicity, there's age, there's so much stuff in there for you to try that implicit bias test. And you'll be surprised at what might have changed about your own biases if you took this test 15 years ago. So Harvard Implicit Bias Test, total A+. The next is 6-word race card. This was a project that was funded by the Smithsonian. And what they do is they have people just describe themselves in 6 words. And it's about their culture, their feelings, their experiences. It's a very raw and vulnerable experience. And it's a very quick way to just pop in and see, just for a moment, somebody else's perspective. And so you can create your own card and upload it and just view other people's, but it's very short, it's succinct, but it can be very powerful.
We have a question from an audience, Aster.
Hi,
ahead.
Astar here. 2 questions. You know, the big broad picture is we used to talk about key diversity metrics. We pride ourselves in hiring a diverse slate of candidates, and so I know, you know, I want to be more informed and say that better. Do you have any tips on that?
Oh, the word metrics in and of itself is kind of a loaded one. That goes to the quantitative value that we have on things over the qualitative. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, you want, rather than saying key diversity metrics, say key diversity takeaways or experience or culture. I think it is easier to talk about culture because that does get to the qualitative, and you can have cultural milestones that are quantitative as well. But again, the idea of numbers being king is where we want to step back and go for that more cultural and the qualitative experience. And qualitative experiences, for those of you, I have a PhD in biochemistry. I thought that if it didn't have a number and an error bar, it didn't exist for a real long time. But qualitative research is sophisticated. There are wonderful ways to learn about values of your organization through qualitative interviewing. And there are many tools out there to help that happen. So the qualitative data isn't just people talking and reviewing you on Glassdoor. There are ways to approach it scientifically. Awesome, thank you. All right, so once again, thank you for your time and attention, and I'll be hanging out here if you have any other questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. All right, well, thanks.